The security guard's hand closed around Amber Robinson's arm before her brain could process what was happening. Her purse hit the marble floor of the luxury mall, contents scattering across the reflective tile, lip balm rolling toward designer storefronts, her phone spinning like a compass, her wallet splaying open for everyone to see. The overhead lights multiplied in the polished floor, each one stabbing into her already overwhelmed senses. Voices echoed off the vaulted ceiling, layering into a wall of sound that made her chest tighten. For 3 seconds, the Galleria went completely still. Amber looked up from where she'd been forced to kneel, her hands shaking as strangers formed a circle around her, phones already recording. Standing at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, wearing that same smug smile she'd spent 3 years trying to forget, was her ex. "Still can't handle the real world, I see," he announced to the growing audience, his voice dripping with practiced concern that fooled everyone who didn't know him. Some things never change. He had no idea who she was anymore. No idea that the anxious woman he remembered, the one who'd let him speak for her at restaurants, who'd apologized for existing, who'd believed him when he said her autism made her broken, was gone. No idea about the platinum wedding band she wore on a chain beneath her blouse, the penthouse overlooking the harbor she'd left that morning, or the man whose last name she now carried. And her ex definitely had no idea about the man whose phone number was programmed as Amore in her contacts, the man whose security team monitored her location at all times, the man whose empire stretched across 3 continents, and whose enemies knew better than to speak his name carelessly. Luca Moretti. Her husband. The Italian who'd made kings nervous. As Amber's trembling fingers found her phone among the scattered contents and Luca's number appeared on the screen, she watched something shift in her ex's expression, not understanding yet, but the first shadow of doubt. He'd just humiliated the wrong woman. And in approximately 12 minutes, when Luca's car pulled into the underground garage with the kind of silence that meant serious men were coming, her ex was going to learn a lesson about consequences that would dismantle everything he'd built on borrowed confidence and other people's pain. But he still didn't know it yet. Right now, in this moment, surrounded by officers Tony Gardner, Edward Wallace, and Jeremy Haynes who thought they were handling a routine disturbance, he still thought she was nothing. That was about to change. Before we dive deeper into this story of power, protection, and reclaiming your voice, I want to thank you for being here. Your support means everything. Do me a favor, subscribe to the channel now, and let me know in the comment section where you are watching from. Now, let's get into this journey. Amber stood in the walk-in closet of the penthouse that morning, selecting a simple black sweater. Despite the luxury surrounding her, cashmere and silk organized by color like an expensive rainbow, she still gravitated toward understated choices. Old survival instincts from harder times. "You're doing it again," Luca said from the doorway, already dressed in a charcoal suit that made him look like he belonged in a boardroom or a Renaissance painting. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his presence commanding even in this domestic moment. "Doing what?" She turned, fastening simple gold studs in her ears. "Choosing the plainest things in your wardrobe." He crossed to her, sliding his arms around her waist with the careful gentleness he always used, like she was precious. "You're married to a man who owns half of the harbor district. Stop dressing like you're afraid someone will notice you." She laughed softly. "I like simple things. I like spoiling you." He kissed her temple, that gesture that never failed to ground her. "You spoil me by loving me exactly as I am." His expression softened in that way it only did for her. "Always." Then more seriously, "You're going to the Galleria today. Just picking up the cufflinks you wanted." "I won't be long." Something flickered in his eyes, that protective instinct that bordered on obsession, a quality she both cherished and occasionally found overwhelming. "Take Marco and Dante with you." Luca, I don't need bodyguards to buy cufflinks. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, she saw not her gentle husband, but the man whose reputation made politicians return his calls within the hour. Amber, you know what I am. What I do. You know the enemies that creates. You don't leave this house without security. Non-negotiable. The steel in his voice was absolute. This was Luca Moretti speaking, not just her husband, but the man who controlled shipping routes and political favors with equal efficiency. She cupped his face, feeling the slight tension in his jaw. Okay. I'll take them. The tension left his shoulders immediately. Thank you. He checked his watch, understated, Swiss, worth more than most people's cars. I have a meeting at the docks. I'll be back by 6. We have reservations at 7. Where? It's a surprise. That dangerous half-smile. Wear the navy dress. The one that makes me forget I have self-control. Heat crept up her neck. You're impossible. Only for you. One more kiss, thorough and claiming, before he left her breathless in their closet. 2 hours later, Amber walked through the Galleria with Marco and Dante maintaining professional distance. The mall was a temple to wealth, marble floors reflecting crystal chandeliers, Christmas decorations glittering gold and silver, every storefront a monument to elegance. She'd just exited the luxury men's shop, distinctive shopping bag in hand, when she saw him. Her ex, leaning against a display of designer watches, laughing with a blonde woman whose jewelry probably cost more than Amber used to make in a year. He looked exactly the same. Same condescending smile. Same expensive clothes that somehow looked cheap on him. Same entitled posture of a man who'd never faced real consequences. Amber's breath caught. The shopping bag nearly slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers. 3 years. She'd thought she was healed. Thought she'd moved past this. But seeing him brought everything back, the voice that explained her to other people, the way he'd weaponized her neurodivergence, the nights she'd cried alone. She should turn around. Walk away. But her feet were rooted to the marble floor, her sensory system already overloading from the shock. He looked up. Their eyes met. For 1 second, nothing. Then recognition flashed across his face, followed by shock, then something uglier. Contempt. He whispered something to the blonde, then started walking toward Amber with that familiar swagger. Every instinct screamed to run, but she was frozen, her nervous system shutting down the way it always did under extreme stress. Well, well, her ex drawled as he approached, that condescending tone making her skin crawl. Amber Robinson. Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd be at the outlet malls where you belong. His voice hadn't changed. That was the first thing Amber noticed as her ex closed the distance between them, his shoes clicking against marble with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. The same tone he'd used to explain her to waiters, to her own family, to strangers at parties who'd asked her direct questions. 3 years earlier, she'd thought that voice sounded protective. They'd met at a networking event she'd forced herself to attend despite the sensory nightmare of too many conversations happening simultaneously. He'd appeared beside her at the quieter edge of the room, handed her a glass of water without asking, and said, "You look like you need rescuing." At the time, it had felt like kindness. "I'm not great with crowds," she'd admitted, grateful someone had noticed. "I can tell." His smile had been warm. "You're different. I like that. Different." The word had felt like acceptance then. She hadn't yet learned it was a diagnosis. Within 3 months, he'd moved into her apartment. Within 6, he'd convinced her his name should be on her lease for stability. Within 8, he was answering her phone. "Amber's resting right now," he'd say smoothly when her sister called. She gets overwhelmed easily. I'll have her call you back. She never questioned it. He was helping, wasn't he? Managing the things that exhausted her. But somewhere between helping and controlling, the language shifted. You know you process things differently, he'd say when she needed a moment to think before responding. Not cruelly, never cruelly at first. Just matter of fact, like he was stating something they both understood. That's why you need me to handle the complicated stuff. When she asked him not to rearrange her carefully organized closet, you're being rigid again. That's the autism talking. When she couldn't eat at the loud restaurant he'd chosen, you're always so difficult about food. Normal people just adapt. When she tried to explain why his last-minute plan changes triggered her anxiety, you're remembering it wrong. I told you about this days ago. You just don't listen when you're in one of your moods. She started writing things down to prove she wasn't misremembering. He found the notebook and laughed, not unkindly. Baby, you're documenting our relationship like it's evidence. You see how paranoid that looks. She threw the notebook away. She stayed because he never hit her. Because he paid half the rent. Because her family liked him, he's so patient with you, Amber. Because leaving felt impossible, when she couldn't trust her own perception of reality anymore. Because on good days, he was the man who'd handed her water at that networking event. Because she'd started to believe what he'd spent 2 years teaching her, that her autism wasn't just a difference, but a deficit. That without him, she'd fail at the basic mechanics of existing. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday. They were at her mother's house for dinner, and her mom had asked Amber about her new project at work. Before Amber could answer, he'd interrupted. She's stressed about it, honestly. You know how she gets with deadlines, overwhelmed, disorganized. I've been helping her manage it. Amber had looked down at her plate, feeling the familiar heat of shame. Then her nephew, 6 years old and recently diagnosed autistic himself, had whispered to her, "Does your brain work like mine, Aunt Amber?" Yes, she'd whispered back. Does he know that's okay? That question fractured something. She'd looked at her nephew's hopeful face, then at her ex's satisfied expression, and understood, if I stay, I'm teaching this child that people like us need to apologize for existing. She left that night. Took her documents, her laptop, her grandmother's necklace. Left everything else. The isolation afterward was brutal. He'd called everyone in her life first, framing her departure as a breakdown caused by her inability to handle adult responsibilities. Some people believed him. Therapy took 6 months before she could trust her own memories again. Her therapist had asked, "What would you tell your nephew if he were in your situation?" "I'd tell him to run." Then run, Amber. She rebuilt slowly. New apartment. New phone number. New job across the city. She blocked him everywhere, deleted mutual friends who questioned her version of events, and made herself disappear from his world entirely. She never wanted him to find her. But the universe had other plans. And this time, when he tried to explain her to strangers, she wouldn't be alone. Amber met Luca Moretti 8 months after she'd stopped believing in gentle men. She was working late at the architectural firm, the building nearly empty, when she'd heard voices in the conference room, her boss and a client discussing shipping logistics and import licenses. She'd been walking past with her headphones on, trying to finish her project before the weekend, when the conference room door opened and someone stepped directly into her path. She'd flinched. Hard. Dropped her tablet. "Me despias," the man said immediately, stepping back with his hands visible, palms open. "I'm sorry. I wasn't paying attention." She'd looked up then, expecting impatience or irritation. Instead, she found dark eyes that seemed genuinely concerned. "I didn't mean to startle you," he continued, his accent turning certain words softer. He didn't move closer. Didn't reach for her tablet. Just waited. "It's okay," she managed, crouching to retrieve it. "Is it broken?" "No, it's fine." "Good." He paused, then asked carefully, "Are you all right?" Not "are you okay" like people said reflexively. But "are you all right," like he actually wanted to know. "Yes." "Just didn't expect anyone." "I understand. I'll be more careful." He'd nodded once, respectfully, and returned to the conference room without another word. She learned his name from her boss the next morning. Luca Moretti. Italian investor. Shipping and international trade. Her boss had used the reverent tone usually reserved for clients who could make or break the firm. She didn't expect to see him again. But he'd returned 3 days later, asking for her specifically. He needed architectural concepts for a harbor district development. "Your boss mentioned you specialize in adaptive design," he'd said. "I'd like to hear your ideas." Their first meeting lasted 2 hours. He never interrupted. When she asked for a moment to organize her thoughts, he'd simply waited, patient and unhurried. When she mentioned the fluorescent lights were bothering her, he'd immediately switched to the desk lamp without comment or question. When she explained her design philosophy, he'd listened like her words mattered. "You think differently than most architects," he'd observed at the end. She'd tensed, waiting for the familiar reframing. "It's extraordinary," he continued. "The way you consider how people actually move through spaces, how they experience them. I've never seen anything like it. Extraordinary. Not different. Not difficult." Over the next 3 months, their professional relationship evolved into something more personal. He learned her boundaries by asking, not by testing them. "Is this restaurant too loud? We can go somewhere quieter. Would you prefer I call before visiting, or is spontaneity all right? Tell me if I'm ever too much." He never once spoke for her. It was 6 months before she learned what he actually was. Not just an investor. Not just wealthy. Luca Moretti was the heir to one of Italy's oldest and most powerful crime families, a man whose influence stretched across shipping routes, political offices, and the kind of networks that operated in shadows. She discovered it by accident, overhearing a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. When she'd confronted him, terrified and confused, he hadn't lied or deflected. "Yes," he'd said simply. "That's who I am. That's what I do. If you want to walk away, I understand. But I need you to know, I would never bring that darkness to your door. And I would never let anyone hurt you. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted you to know me first. Not my name. Not my reputation. Just me." She should have run. Every rational instinct said to leave. But she'd looked at this man who'd learned her sensory triggers without being asked, who'd never once made her feel like an inconvenience, who'd listened to her like her thoughts were valuable, and she'd realized something, his asking permission. "Even now. I need time to think," she'd said. "Take all the time you need." She'd taken 2 weeks. He never pushed. Never showed up unannounced. Just sent a single text, "Whatever you decide, I respect it." When she finally called him, her voice had been steady. "I want to keep seeing you. But I need honesty." "Always." "Always," he'd promised. Their marriage happened quietly 6 months later. No spectacle. No society announcement. Just them, a judge, and 2 witnesses in a private ceremony that felt more like a promise than a performance. That night, in their hotel room, he'd cupped her face gently. I have only one rule, he'd said, his voice soft but absolute. No one humiliates you. Ever? Do you understand? She'd understood. And for the first time in years, she'd felt safe enough to believe it. The mall snapped back into focus with cruel clarity. We need you to calm down, Officer Tony Gardner was saying, his hand hovering near Amber's shoulder without quite touching. His tone carried that practiced patience people used with children or difficult customers. Amber wasn't crying. Wasn't shouting. She was simply standing there, breathing carefully, trying to keep her nervous system from shutting down completely while her ex stood 3 feet away wearing vindication-like cologne. I am calm, she said quietly. Then let's not make this a bigger scene than it needs to be, Officer Edward Wallace added, positioning himself between Amber and the growing crowd. Why don't you collect your things and move along? Her ex laughed, loud enough to carry. See? Even they can tell you're being dramatic. This is exactly what I dealt with for 2 years, constant victim mentality, always making everything about her problems. Several phones were recording now. Amber could see them in her peripheral vision, a dozen digital witnesses capturing what they thought was a woman causing a disturbance. Sir, please step back, Officer Jeremy Haynes said to her ex, but his tone lacked real authority. It was perfunctory, the kind of warning issued for appearances. I'm just trying to help, her ex replied, raising his hands in mock innocence. I know how she gets when she's overwhelmed. She needs someone to explain what's happening, because she doesn't process things like normal people. There it was. The old script. The familiar diminishment dressed up as concern. Amber's hands were shaking as she knelt to gather her scattered belongings, each movement mechanical. Lip balm. Wallet. Keys. Her phone lay face up 3 feet away, Luca's name still visible on the screen from the call she'd made 7 minutes ago. 7 minutes. He'd said he was 12 minutes away from the docks. Do you need medical attention? Gardner asked, crouching beside her with that infuriating gentleness people used when they'd already decided you were fragile. No. I just need. She needs space, her ex interrupted smoothly. And probably medication. She never was good about staying consistent with her prescriptions. Amber's vision blurred. Not with tears, but with the familiar static of sensory overload hitting its peak. The voices, the lights, the judgment, the lies, all of it layering into something unbearable. Then the air changed. It was subtle at first. A ripple of awareness moving through the crowd like wind through grass. People turning. Conversations faltering. The kind of silence that preceded something significant. Luca walked through the mall with the unhurried confidence of someone who'd never needed to announce himself. He wore the charcoal suit from that morning, not a thread out of place, his expression calm and utterly neutral. Marco and Dante flanked him at a respectful distance, their presence adding weight without aggression. Officer Wallace straightened instinctively. Gardner's hand moved away from Amber. Even Haynes, who'd been checking his phone, looked up and went still. Luca's eyes found Amber first. Only Amber. He crossed the remaining distance and extended his hand, helping her stand with the kind of gentleness that contrasted sharply with everything else about him. Amore, he said softly, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. Are you hurt? She shook her head, not trusting her voice yet. He studied her face for 3 seconds, reading what she couldn't say, then turned to the officers with that same unsettling calm. Gentlemen. I appreciate your response time. His accent made certain words sound almost courteous, but there was steel underneath. However, this situation is resolved. Sir, we are still assessing, Gardner began. You're observing, Luca corrected gently. There's a difference. Wallace shifted his weight. And you are her husband. 2 words. Delivered without emphasis. Without threat. Just fact. The officers exchanged glances, uncertain of what had changed, but sensing they'd lost some invisible authority they'd held moments before. Amber's ex had been silent during Luca's arrival, watching with the wary confusion of someone trying to assess a situation that had shifted beyond his comprehension. Now he stepped forward, his confidence returning. Husband. He laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. Amber, seriously? You got married? To who? Some guy you met online who doesn't know what a handful you are yet. He looked Luca up and down dismissively. Good luck with that, buddy. You have no idea what you signed up for. Luca didn't respond. Didn't move. Didn't even acknowledge the words. He simply placed his hand on the small of Amber's back and waited. The ex laughed again, louder this time, playing to the crowd. This is perfect. This is exactly the kind of impulsive decision she'd make. Marry some stranger because she can't handle being alone. Still, Luca said nothing. And somehow, his silence was more terrifying than any threat could have been. It was Marco who broke the silence, stepping forward with his phone already in hand. Mr. Moretti, the car is ready when you are. Should I contact Moretti? Officer Wallace's voice had changed. Gone was the perfunctory patience. Now there was something sharper. Recognition. Luca didn't acknowledge the shift. He simply kept his attention on Amber, his hand still resting protectively on her back. Do you want to leave, or do you want to finish this? Amber looked at her ex, at the officers who'd dismissed her, at the crowd with their phones still recording. For 2 years, she'd let him control the narrative. Let him explain her to the world. I want to finish it, she said. Luca nodded once, then turned to the officers with that same unnerving calm. I'll need copies of the security footage from the past 20 minutes. All angles. And I'll need the names and badge numbers of everyone who responded to this call. Gardner shifted uncomfortably. Sir, that's not standard procedure for. I'm not asking what's standard. Luca's voice remained quiet, almost gentle. I'm telling you what I need. The footage, the names, and written statements from each of you describing what you observed when you arrived. Mr. Moretti, Wallace said carefully, we are happy to cooperate, but. Thank you. Luca checked his watch with the casual efficiency of someone used to people complying. The mall's security office is on the 2nd floor, correct? We can review the footage there. It wasn't a question. Haynes looked at his partners, clearly out of his depth. We should probably contact our supervisor before. Excellent idea, Luca agreed smoothly. Please do that now. Amber's ex had been watching this exchange with growing confusion. Now he stepped forward again, his voice taking on that reasonable tone he'd always used when trying to gaslight her in public. Look, I don't know who you think you are, but this is between me and Amber. She has a history of blowing things out of proportion when she's stressed. I was just trying to help her. You put your hands on my wife, Luca said, his tone unchanged. I didn't touch her. The security footage will show otherwise. The ex's smile faltered slightly. I stared at her when she looked unsteady. That's not. You grabbed her arm. Luca pulled out his own phone, swiped twice, and turned the screen toward the officers. Marco recorded it while approaching. Would you like to see? The footage was clear. Crystal clear. Her ex's hand closing around Amber's arm, pulling her slightly off balance. His face close to hers, speaking loudly enough to draw attention. The security guard's hand on her shoulder, forcing her to kneel. Wallace's expression shifted from uncertain to carefully neutral, the look of someone realizing they'd walked into something more complicated than a simple disturbance. "That's out of context," her ex said quickly. She was having one of her episodes. "I was trying to prevent her from making a scene." Amber felt Luca's hand press gently against her back, not controlling, but encouraging. Supporting. She stepped forward slightly. "I wasn't having an episode," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still flooding her system. "I was shopping. You approached me. You publicly mocked my autism. You told strangers I was mentally unstable. You touched me without permission when I tried to walk away." "Amber, you're confused." "I'm not confused." Her voice didn't rise, didn't waver. "I'm autistic." "That's not the same thing. And you spent 2 years teaching me I couldn't trust my own perception." "But I can." "I do." "Baby, listen to yourself. You're being manipulated by this guy you barely. We've been married 14 months, Luca said quietly. Legally, internationally, and very publicly within circles that matter. Her family attended. Your version of events is already contradicted by documentation. The ex's face flushed. "Who the hell are you?" "Luca Moretti." He said it without emphasis, like he was ordering coffee. The name landed differently this time. Wallace and Gardner exchanged a glance, not confusion now, but calculation. The kind of look that meant they were rapidly reassessing everything about this situation. "I don't care what your name is," the ex said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Amber needs help, not some controlling husband who. I need you to stop talking about me like I'm not here." Amber's words cut through his. "You did that for 2 years. You don't get to do it anymore." Luca smiled then, barely, just a slight curve at the corner of his mouth, but it was approval. Pride, even. The ex looked around desperately, seeking support from the crowd, the officers, anyone. But people were lowering their phones now, their expressions changing as they realized they'd recorded something other than what they'd assumed. "This is insane," he said, laughing again, but it sounded hollow now. "Desperate. You people are witnessing harassment. I'm the victim here." "No," Luca said softly. "You're not." And in that moment, watching the confidence drain from her ex's face, as he finally understood that his words no longer controlled the narrative, Amber felt something shift inside her chest. Not revenge. Not triumph. Just the quiet recognition that she'd already won by refusing to be silent. The security office on the second floor was smaller than Amber expected, banks of monitors showing every angle of the mall in stark digital clarity. The security supervisor, a nervous man named Mitchell, had pulled up the footage within 90 seconds of Luca's request. "From 14 minutes ago," Luca said, pointing to a timestamp. "All 3 angles." Mitchell complied without argument. The footage was damning. Her ex approaching while she stood alone. His hand gripping her arm when she turned away. The security guard's immediate focus on Amber rather than the man creating the disturbance. The crowd forming, phones rising. Every moment of humiliation captured in high definition. "I'll need copies sent to this address," Luca said, handing Mitchell a card. "And copies retained in your system with documentation that they were requested by legal counsel." "Legal counsel?" Officer Gardner asked from the doorway. "My wife was publicly harassed and physically restrained without cause." "Yes, legal counsel." While Mitchell burned the footage to a drive, Luca made 3 phone calls. Each one brief, precise, in Italian. Amber caught fragments, names she didn't recognize, instructions delivered in that same quiet tone that somehow conveyed absolute expectation of compliance. The third call was in English. "John? Luca Moretti." "Yes, Good to hear your voice as well. I need employment history on someone. He rattled off her ex's full name, the company he'd mentioned working for during their relationship. Any formal complaints, any HR documentation. Discreetly, but thoroughly. By morning. Perfect. I appreciate it. He ended the call and turned to the officers, who'd been watching with increasing unease. Gentlemen, you're free to go. I have everything I need from this location. Mr. Moretti, Wallace said carefully, we still need to file a report about the initial disturbance. Of course. My wife will be available to provide a statement through her attorney. Marco will give you the contact information. It was a dismissal. Polite, but absolute. Haynes bristled. Sir, we can't just. You responded to a call about a disturbance, Luca interrupted gently. You found a woman being publicly harassed by her ex-partner. You have footage, witnesses, and statements. What part of your job remains incomplete? The officers looked at each other. Wallace was the first to nod, recognizing that whatever authority they'd thought they held here had evaporated the moment Luca's name was spoken. We'll be in touch through official channels. I look forward to it. They left, and Amber watched them go with something like relief. By the time they returned to the main floor, the crowd had changed. People were still recording, but now they were filming her ex, who'd been cornered by 2 more security guards and was arguing loudly about harassment and false accusations. Amber's phone buzzed. A text from her sister. Someone just sent me a video of you at the mall. Are you okay? Who is that guy yelling at you? Another buzz. A friend from work. Holy shit, is this you? This is going viral. Everyone's saying that guy is abusive. The narrative was shifting in real time. Not because Luca had threatened anyone. Not because he'd demanded it. Simply because the truth, properly documented and amplified through the right channels, had a gravity of its own. Her ex saw them approaching and tried one more time. This isn't over. You can't just. It is over, Luca said quietly. By tomorrow morning, your employer will have footage of you physically restraining a woman in public. Your social media will be flooded with people who witnessed what you did here. And every HR complaint ever filed against you, and yes, there are several, will be compiled and distributed to relevant parties. You can't do that. That's private. Nothing is private when you make it my business. Luca's voice never rose above conversational. You humiliated my wife. Publicly. Deliberately. In front of witnesses and cameras. Did you believe there would be no consequences? The ex's face had gone pale. You're threatening me. No. I'm explaining reality. Luca checked his watch. Your 15 minutes of relevance are over. I suggest you leave before security formally trespasses you. For the first time since Amber had known him, her ex had nothing to say. He looked at her one last time, searching for the woman who used to apologize, who used to shrink, who used to let him control the narrative. That woman was gone. Amber held his gaze, calm and steady, until he looked away first. Luca turned to her, extending his arm with that old-world courtesy that somehow never felt performative when he did it. Home, he asked gently. She slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, feeling the solid warmth of him, the unwavering support. Home, she agreed. As they walked toward the exit, past the cameras and the whispers and the digital evidence of what had happened, Amber didn't look back. She didn't need to. The story was no longer his to tell. The penthouse was exactly what Amber needed, controlled, quiet, safe. Luca had dimmed the lights before they'd even removed their coats, understanding without asking that she needed gentle transition after the sensory assault of the mall. He disappeared into the kitchen while she sank onto the sofa, finally allowing her nervous system to acknowledge what it had been holding at bay for the past hour. Her hands were trembling now, the adrenaline draining away and leaving exhaustion in its wake. She pulled off her shoes, tucked her feet beneath her, and let the silence settle around her like a blanket. Through the open doorway, she could hear Luca moving with deliberate quiet, the soft clink of ceramic, water running, the refrigerator opening and closing. He returned 5 minutes later with chamomile tea in her favorite mug, the one with the smooth glaze that didn't have any texture to distract her fingers. He set it on the table within reach, then settled into the armchair across from her. Not beside her. Not crowding her space. Just present. "Do you want to talk, or do you need silence?" he asked. "Silence for now," she said softly. "Take all the time you need." He pulled out his phone, handling what she assumed was follow-up from the mall, messages sent, calls returned, all of it conducted in near silence while she sat with her tea and let her mind slowly untangle. The thing about sensory overload was that it didn't end when the stimulus stopped. Her brain needed time to process, to sort through everything that had hit it at once, to file it all away in some manner that made sense. She'd learned not to rush this part. 30 minutes passed. Then 40. The tea grew lukewarm in her hands. Finally, she spoke. "I didn't freeze." Luca looked up from his phone, his full attention shifting to her immediately. "No. You didn't. I always freeze. When I'm overwhelmed, when people talk over me, when situations get confrontational. I freeze." She stared at the tea, watching the surface ripple slightly from her still trembling hands. "But today I didn't." "You spoke for yourself," Luca said quietly. Clearly and calmly. "I didn't apologize either. Not once." The realization felt significant, though she couldn't quite articulate why. "He kept trying to make me doubt myself, and I just didn't. I didn't believe him. Because you know the truth now. About yourself. About what he did." Amber looked up, meeting Luca's steady gaze. "I was terrified. The whole time. My heart was racing, my thoughts were fragmenting, I could barely breathe. But I didn't let him see it. I didn't give him that power." "You took it back," Luca said. "The power he stole from you. With your help. Amore, I just stood there. You're the one who spoke. You're the one who refused to be silenced." She thought about that. About the moment she'd looked at the officers and stated calmly what had happened. About facing her ex and telling him he didn't get to explain her anymore. About watching him realize his words no longer shaped her reality. "I spent 2 years believing I was the problem," she said softly. "That my autism made me difficult. That I needed someone to manage me because I couldn't handle life on my own. And even after I left, even after therapy, part of me still wondered if he was right. And now I know he was lying. To me. To everyone." She set the mug down carefully. "He didn't help me. He controlled me. There's a difference." Luca leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting on his knees. "Are you all right? Truly?" She considered the question honestly. Her body was exhausted, her mind still processing, her emotions raw and close to the surface. But underneath all of that was something solid. Something that felt like foundation rather than fracture. "I think I am," she said. "Or I will be. What do you need from me tonight? Not what should we do or let me fix this. Just what do you need?" "Just this," she said. "Just you, here, letting me process without trying to rush me through it. Always." They sat together in the dimming light, the city visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows but muted, distant. Amber felt the last of the tension begin to drain from her shoulders, her breathing finally evening out into something approaching normal. She didn't feel victorious. Didn't feel triumphant. Just tired, and safe, and profoundly grateful that she'd survived long enough to know the difference between love and control. "Luca," she said quietly. "Yes? Thank you for not handling it for me. For letting me speak." His expression softened. "Amore, it was always your story to tell. I was just making sure people finally listened." She nodded, understanding settling deep in her chest. She was tired of fighting. Tired of proving. Tired of defending her right to exist exactly as she was. But tonight, for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid anymore. And that felt like enough. The video went viral by morning. Amber woke to 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and her phone vibrating continuously with notifications she'd forgotten to silence. Beside her, Luca was already awake, propped against the headboard with his tablet, scrolling through what appeared to be news articles. "How bad is it?" she asked, her voice still rough with sleep. "Depends on your perspective." He handed her the tablet. For him. Catastrophic. The headline read, "Luxury Mall Incident Exposes Pattern of Abuse." Below it, the security footage played in a loop, her ex grabbing her arm, his face twisted with contempt, the crowd forming around them. The article identified him by name, his employer, even included screenshots of old social media posts where he'd made jokes about his crazy ex-girlfriend. Amber scrolled further. Twitter was ablaze with commentary. TikTok had dissected every frame of the video. Reddit threads analyzed his body language, his words, the visible fear on her face. Autism advocacy groups had picked up the story, using it as an example of how neurodivergent people, particularly women, were dismissed and gaslit by partners and authority figures alike. "There are over 2 million views," Luca said quietly. "And it's still climbing." Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from her sister. "Every major outlet is covering this. Mom's been crying all morning. She had no idea what he did to you." Another message, from her former colleague. "He got fired." HR released a statement about values and workplace conduct. They found 3 formal complaints from women at his company. Amber set the phone down, feeling strangely numb. This was vindication, wasn't it? The world finally seeing what she'd lived through. Her truth, validated by millions of strangers. So why did she feel so hollow? "He sent you a message," Luca said carefully, nodding toward her phone. "Through a lawyer. It's marked urgent." She picked up the phone. The preview was visible without opening. "I want to apologize for any misunderstanding. My behavior was inappropriate and I deeply regret." Amber stared at the words. Misunderstanding. Even now, even in his forced apology, he couldn't name what he'd actually done. "What do you want to do?" Luca asked. "Press charges. Civil suit. I can have a team of attorneys here within the hour." She thought about that. About depositions and courtrooms, about facing him again with lawyers present, about every intimate detail of their relationship dissected for legal purposes. About keeping him in her life, even tangentially, for months or years while legal proceedings unfolded. "What do you want?" Luca asked again, gentler this time. Amber looked at the message preview, at the hollow apology crafted by someone who cared more about reputation management than actual remorse. She thought about her nephew, about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, about the woman she was now. "I want distance," she said finally. "I want him gone from my life completely. No statements, no interviews, no revenge. Just gone. You don't owe the world your story, Luca said. I know. She deleted the message without opening it, watching it disappear from her screen. But they have enough. The video shows what happened. People can draw their own conclusions. Her phone buzzed again, a news outlet requesting an interview. Then another, and another. She silenced the notifications, and set it face down on the nightstand. The world's finally listening, Luca observed. And you're choosing not to speak. I already said what I needed to say. At the mall. To him. Amber pulled her knees to her chest, processing. Anything more isn't for me. It's for them. And I'm done performing my trauma for other people's consumption. Luca studied her for a long moment, then nodded with what looked like approval. What about his apology? It wasn't an apology. It was damage control. She thought about the carefully worded message, the lawyer who'd probably drafted it, the calculated attempt to salvage what remained of his reputation. Real apologies name the harm. Take responsibility. His didn't do either. So you're letting it go? No. I'm choosing not to carry it anymore. There's a difference. Throughout the day, the coverage intensified. His employer released a formal statement terminating his employment. Two of his ex-girlfriends came forward with their own stories, creating a pattern the media seized on hungrily. Hashtags trended. Think pieces were written about neurodivergent women in abusive relationships, about how society dismisses their experiences, about the autism to gaslighting pipeline. Amber read some of it. Not all. Just enough to understand that her silence was somehow more powerful than any statement she could have made. By evening, her ex had posted a public apology on social media, longer, more detailed, written in the performative language of someone who'd been media trained. He used words like reflect and learn and do better. He mentioned therapy. He promised to examine his behavior. Amber read it once, then closed the app. Does it feel like closure? Luca asked, appearing in the doorway with dinner. She considered that. No. But I think that's okay. Closure isn't something he can give me. It's something I give myself. By choosing distance. By choosing peace. Her phone lit up one final time, another message from her ex's lawyer, marked urgent, settlement offer. Amber picked up her phone, looked at the preview, and without opening it, blocked the number. That's my answer, she said quietly. Luca smiled, set down the plates, and pulled her close. I'm proud of you. For what? For knowing what you need. For choosing yourself. Amber leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the safety she'd built for herself in the 3 years since leaving. The world was still talking, still analyzing, still dissecting every frame of that video. But she was done listening. She'd already moved on. 4 months later, Amber stood in front of 12 women in a community center conference room, her hands only slightly trembling as she clicked to the next slide of her presentation. The thing about gaslighting, she said, her voice steady despite the audience, is that it works best on people who already doubt themselves. And society teaches autistic women to doubt ourselves from childhood. The women nodded, some taking notes, others simply listening with the intense focus she recognized from her own experience. These were the women who'd reached out after the video went viral, who'd seen themselves in her story, who'd asked if she could help them navigate their own situations. She hadn't planned to become a mentor. Hadn't sought out this role. But when the local Autism Advocacy Center had contacted her about facilitating a support group, something had shifted in her chest. A sense of purpose she hadn't expected. You're not too sensitive, she continued. You're not too rigid. You're not making things up or remembering them wrong. Those are things abusive partners say to make you question reality. Your reality is valid. After the session ended, several women approached her with questions, with gratitude, with stories that sounded painfully familiar. Amber listened to each one, offering resources, validation, the kind of clear-eyed acknowledgement she desperately needed 3 years ago. Luca was waiting in the lobby when she finished, reading something on his phone, but looking up immediately when she appeared. He'd driven her here, offered to wait, but hadn't inserted himself into the session, or even asked what she'd discussed. Just supported from a distance, the way he always did. "How did it go?" he asked as they walked to the car. "Good. Hard, but good." She slipped her hand into his. One woman said hearing me talk about my experience made her realize she wasn't imagining things. That meant something. "You're helping people." "I'm trying." He opened the car door for her, that old-fashioned courtesy that somehow never felt patronizing when he did it. "I'm proud of you. You know that, right? You tell me frequently." "Good. I'll continue." They had one stop before heading home. Luca needed to pick up a watch he'd left for repair. At the Galleria. The same luxury mall where everything had happened. Amber felt her chest tighten as they pulled into the parking garage, muscle memory responding before her rational mind could intervene. But Luca's hand found hers across the console, warm and steady. "We can go somewhere else," he said quietly. She took a breath, counted to 4 the way her therapist had taught her, and shook her head. "No. I want to do this." They walked through the main entrance together, and Amber braced herself for stares, for recognition, for the whispers that had followed her for weeks after the video went viral. But the mall was just a mall. People shopped, talked, moved through the space without giving her a second glance. The marble floors still reflected the overhead lights, but they didn't feel threatening anymore. Just bright. She walked past the bench where her belongings had scattered, past the spot where her ex had stood, past the security office where they'd reviewed the footage. None of it held power anymore. It was just a place where something had happened once. Luca collected his watch, a simple transaction, polite and efficient. The clerk never looked at Amber with recognition or pity. Just smiled and wished them a good evening. As they walked back toward the exit, Amber caught their reflection in a store window. She looked different than she had 4 months ago. Not physically, but in the way she carried herself. Shoulders back. Head up. Hands securely in Luca's, but not clinging, just connected. "You're smiling," Luca observed. "I am?" "You are." She realized he was right. She was smiling, genuinely, walking through the place that had once represented her worst moment without fear, without shame, without the weight of her past pulling her down. "I used to hate malls," she said as they stepped into the evening air, cool and clean after the recycled atmosphere inside. "And now? Now they are just buildings." She squeezed his hand. "Just spaces I move through on my way to somewhere else." In the car, as Luca navigated the evening traffic toward home, Amber thought about the women she'd spoken with that afternoon. About her nephew, who was thriving in a school that celebrated neurodivergence instead of pathologizing it. About her mother, who'd called last week to apologize for not seeing what had been happening, for believing her ex's version of events. About herself, 4 months ago, kneeling on marble with her world fragmenting around her. That woman had survived. Had spoken. Had refused to be silenced. And this woman, the one sitting in a car beside someone who loved her without trying to fix her, heading home to a life she'd built deliberately and carefully, was proof that survival wasn't the ending. It was just the beginning. "What are you thinking about?" Luca asked, glancing over at a red light. "That I was never broken," Amber said softly. "I was just unheard." And now? She looked at him, at the city lights reflecting in the windows, at the future stretching out ahead of them undefined and open. Now I choose who listens. The light turned green, and they drove forward into whatever came next, together, but not dependent. Connected, but not controlled. In love, but still whole. Exactly as it should be. Amber's story didn't end with revenge. It ended with reclamation. The most powerful thing you can do after someone tries to diminish you isn't to destroy them, it's to rebuild yourself, so completely that their version of you becomes irrelevant. If this story resonated with you, subscribe and turn on notifications. Drop a comment telling me which moment hit hardest. I read every one. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone still finding their voice. Someone who needs to know that love doesn't require you to become smaller. Amber chose her ending. Now it's your turn to choose yours. Remember, you were never broken. You were just unheard.